Hey you guys, this is Jess with Sourceful Journey, back with another video. So today I want to focus on the topic based off the film, Sound of Freedom. And just for those who are wondering, did she actually go to see it? Yes, I went to go see it. So, yeah, without further ado, we're gonna go over some details in reference to, really just give like an overall scope of the film. I would try to make it where it's not too much of a spoiler alert, but at the same time, I'm going to tie some figures that I came across online too to coincide with the film. And towards the end of it, or maybe at certain points throughout the discussion, I will share my thoughts as we progress onward. And after all this is said and done, I would want to hear you guys' thoughts as well. So, yeah, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Now, as far as with The Sound of Freedom, it's a film that is based off the life of Tim Ballard in terms of his experience with working within the government. He is the one who actually founded Operation Underground. The acronym would be OUR, O-U-R, which I thought was pretty unique in its own way. So the great thing about this particular film is because it's more of one of those indie films. When you take a look at it, you can just kind of tell that it fits into that category. And as far as the box office numbers, it went well over 50, was it 50 million? Yeah, 50 million at the box office within its first week, which is pretty phenomenal. And again, it's not too shabby, especially when you think about the fact that it is more of an indie film. Now, what was interesting, because I'm going based off my notes, I came prepared. So, some fun facts. Some of the main characters that really stood out to me when I was watching the film was, for instance, Jim Caviezel. I might have butchered his name, but if you guys recall The Passion of the Christ, the one who actually played Jesus Christ in the film, that guy, he was the main character. He played Tim Ballard in the film, which was a great choice. Tim Ballard, ultimately, he's a former government agent for the Department of Homeland Security, to put it plainly. He eventually quits his job and begins to set up his own nonprofit organization, which was the company called Operation Underground Railroad. That was the one I was referring to just a moment ago. So another character that stood out to me was Mira Sorvino. And she plays Catherine Ballard, which is actually the spouse to Tim Ballard in this case. I don't know about you guys when it comes to watching certain films. I always get excited when I see faces that I recognize, especially if they were amazing actors and actresses from previous films or television shows. So for Mira Sorvino, for some of you who may not recall how she looks, but you know the name stands out to you, she's known for playing in The Replacement Killers, Stuber, which was a hilarious film. If you haven't seen Stuber, which is spelled S-T-U-B-E-R, I definitely encourage you guys to look at it if you need a good laugh. And also she played in a film known as Look Away. Now, as far as some of the other main characters in the film, one of the individuals who was the primary victim that was kidnapped, her name is Crystal Aparicio, and she plays the character known as Rocio, R-O-C-I-O. She's the primary victim technically in this film, in my opinion. And Tim really set his focus on trying to locate her, to bring her home. She also has a brother in this film. His character's name was Miguel. He played a key factor in this film as well, but if you were to talk about who's the main focus as far as the child that's being rescued from human trafficking, it would be this character, Crystal Aparicio, who played Rocio. Okay, she recently played in a film known as Stolen Away. By her being such a young lady, a young little girl, if you will, she doesn't have really much of a track record in terms of her acting experience as of yet, but I'll say after this film, I think she could definitely be one that's truly on the rise. I'm pretty convinced of that. Now, there's another individual. His name is Bill Camp. He plays this guy named Vampiro. he becomes more of like I would say like an ally to Tim Ballard in the film. His story was very interesting because he actually helped Tim locate well over 50 plus, children who were being human trafficked throughout the film. I thought that was pretty impressive. And he went on to help plenty more. So whoever this Vampiro guy is, it turns out he did help Tim find hundreds of others along the way as well. Now, one thing I thought about in reference to this guy, his story was very telling because I feel like he was just trying to find a way to redeem himself. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. So the Vampiro character that's played by, again, Bill Camp, he was trying to redeem himself because he shared a story with Tim Ballard in the film where he was expressing how he found this young lady, I guess, on the street or on the corner, if you will. Of course, he liked what he was saying, and they agreed on whatever they agreed on to take care of one another's needs. Him sexually, her financially, right? That's just how it rolls. So he brings the young lady in. He's thinking she has to be all of like maybe 25, 26, I think he said in the film, when he was sharing the details with Tim in the conversation. But after they did the deed and he paid her, she was getting ready to leave out. He said at some point when her eyes locked with his, as she was putting her stuff back on, her clothes and shoes, he realized that he wounded her. And he noticed something on her. Spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear this part, you might want to skim through it a little bit quick. Just go by within like maybe a 10-second shot here. So again, this is going to be what we call a spoiler alert. Okay, so I paused there for a minute. So he noticed there was like some type of marking or some type of like little designs on her toes. Typically, young girls, if you guys can think back to when you were a little girl as well, and I can think back to when I was a little girl also, used to like having little designs on our nails, like little stars or hearts and, little glitter, smiley faces. We used to like those little things, and of course, as we got older, we wanted to get our nails done, like the grown women would get their nails done, and of course you get away from all of that, the little stars and sparkles and all that. That was just how it goes. So he said the giveaway to him that when he saw the designs of the young girl's toenails, he realized that this is not a young adult, this is a minor. And that right there tore him up on the inside emotionally. And that was when he had a change of heart when it came to dealing with some of those young girls or young ladies, because he realized that as far as her sense of sadness in her eyes, he was the cause of it. Because people fail to realize that a lot of these victims that are out there on the corners, or now they're doing things online, things like that, a lot of these young girls and young women, let's be clear, the younger women too, a lot of them don't enjoy it. Because as they're going through it, they're thinking, okay, I'm doing this for a reason. And it's just simply to get in and get out. Even for someone as young as that young girl, as Vampiro, the character, was talking about in the film, that could be said about her as well. Even though she had to be all of, he said, I think 14 or 15, if I remember correctly. I think she ended up telling him eventually that she was like 14 or 15. But the fact of the matter is, even for someone as young as her, you can tell that she was not getting any gratification from any of this. She was exposed to it early on, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he said something in there that was like around the age of 8, if I'm not mistaken. But you know, that story was very touching within itself because you could tell he felt such a passion about wanting to redeem himself from his past transgressions. And, you know, it's sad because some of these people, well, these young girls, to be more specific, are being humanly trafficked. And yet, sadly enough, a lot of people don't even realize. They think, oh, that they're beautiful, this and that, don't even realize that these are minors. It's a very, very bad scenario altogether. Because they're the guy who's looking to purchase the time and the experience with this person. Sometimes they can't really even tell if this is just an extremely young individual or not. It's always a tricky slope, a slippery slope when it comes to stuff like that, which is why one should not even want to consider partaking in acts like that, because you never know what type of can of worms you're opening by doing so. So I have to say, in reference to Vampiro's side of the spectrum when it comes to this story, I commend him for wanting to redeem himself and wanting to help save others who are being trafficked against their desires. They're being humanly trafficked against their desires. So, going forward, I got really excited when I saw this next character in the film because he's actually one of my favorites. Jose Zuniga. He played the character of Roberto. Roberto is actually the father to Rocio as well as Miguel. So the two characters, both the girl and the boy, who are projected towards the front as far as the ones that are being human trafficked. And he's the one that actually seeks out Tim Ballard in the film to help find his children and bring them home. And this man's track record, Jose Zuniga, what has he not done? He's actually played in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 4. And for any of you who can recall, his character was Eli Morrow. He's also played in Dark Tower, Twilight, just to name a few. Oh, and of course, Chicago PD, which I honestly think that's really where he started to take off, in my opinion. He actually put in my notes, rock star. It's so funny, I started to laugh when I looked down at it, because he was amazing in that television show. So other than that, yeah, it was pretty amazing to see the cast, and they did a phenomenal job with choosing these people. I felt like each character, as far as the role that they had to take on, they definitely, I guess you could say, as the young kids say, bodied it. They really owned the character in terms of the film, and it really, really amazed me. So I would definitely say that this film is highly recommended. If you haven't seen it yet, or if you've been on the fence about seeing it, go see it. Go see it. Also, just to throw it in here, there will be a link that I'll give towards the end of this YouTube video, because it's going to give individuals an opportunity to actually not only purchase tickets for themselves to help out the cause, but they'll also be able to purchase tickets for others who may be interested in going to see the film. So it's a good way to kind of like pay it forward, especially for those who may not even be able to afford the ticket. The ticket, you know, in my opinion, the pricing was fairly reasonable, but you have to think about, in reference to today's, I guess you could say, societal issues. You know, money doesn't grow on trees. The reality of it all, what once seemed to be so easy to purchase for everyone is now not easy available to purchase for everyone, if that makes sense. So meaning that there's some of us who can do it with not a problem. Like, okay, sure, a few bucks here, a few bucks there, you know, buy some food, whatever the case may be. But to like maybe someone who is not in the same income bracket as you, or someone who may have, you know, several kids to look after, and they may be a single parent, or, you know, they may have a full household where there's a husband and wife and a lot of kids, But they have bills that need to be taken care of, and maybe there's a bill they missed the last month they need to take care of in this month. I'm just giving you examples so you can see where I'm going with this. You can't always assume that everyone's going to have that same sense of freedom, to be able to purchase these type of things. So I'm going to also take it upon myself to pay it forward, and I'm going to actually look into purchasing some tickets for individuals as well. And I would definitely encourage others to do the same. Now, the part that gets interesting, that truly grinded my gears, because as you can imagine, this is all about human trafficking, especially the focus being more so geared towards children, all right? That's the whole notion of save the children. It's really something that needs to be addressed. It's time out for it being swept under the rug, and it really needs to be examined and taken on accordingly. It's something that I feel that's gone on for quite some time. It's been for decades, actually, because for a lot of us, if you can think back, this was a huge issue. Like, I think as early as, I mean, it might have gone further back, but I'm giving you like a guesstimate. I remember when there was a time, it was around like the 80s or even the 90s, where there was a huge uptick of it, not only overseas, but also within the US. We're gonna go into some numbers here in a bit, because I did some research on that, and I wanna share some details with you guys. Again, I'm one that believes that when sharing information, I also believe in giving credit where credit is due. So I will be mentioning where I ended up getting my notes from here that I'm referencing on my screen. So I will make sure to give them the credit they need, because they definitely put the numbers together, and it's very good in detail. But at the same time, I'm going to share my thoughts as we go along with it. Now, one thing that I thought that really just it pretty much said a lot in terms of individuals' thought process. They really took their focus off of what truly matters, which is the fact that, children, again, are always being trafficked. And it's a business that is forever booming. It's something I would hope to see die off, and I'm sure as a lot of people would agree. How soon we'll get there, it's hard to say, but I feel that we're on the right track with it. Now, there's been some individuals who actually took it upon themselves to try to make this more of a political focus. So as you can imagine, one particular group won't point any fingers, but they have felt the need to tie in the political perspective rather than remaining focused on the bigger picture at hand, which is about child trafficking. I honestly feel that regardless of one's political stance, whether you are on the left or the right, or all sides for that matter, we're going to talk about the other parties too, we all should be able to agree on one accord that this is an issue that truly needs to be addressed, because it's not a case of one side having children and the other side doesn't. I mean, let's be honest. Regardless of which party you represent or that you closely align with, you either have children or you know someone who has children, right? You in fact, yourself was once a child, right? So I really feel that we have to, we need to stop it with the BS and really focus on the bigger issue at hand here. And it's not about which political side you're aligned with. No one gives a care when it comes to this topic, that is. So I went to this particular site, and this was really interesting. It was Youth Underground, and I'll make sure to include the link in the description box below. But in reference to the business of human trafficking, it turns out it's the second largest criminal trade in the world after firearms. The second largest criminal trade. That's very telling within itself. And human trafficking, it actually generates well over $150 billion within a year. That's pretty sickening, especially when you're taking into consideration what the numbers are being compared to. The numbers are actually being compared to other organizations, other companies, such as like Netflix we're talking about. We're talking about Disney, of all things, Disney. Also, believe it or not, this also would include McDonald's. Yep, you heard me. I'm not a fan of McDonald's. I don't eat McDonald's, to be honest. I did years ago. But after doing some research in terms of the type of things they put into their food, and then of course me just changing my own eating habits too, you know. I don't know if I ever shared it with you guys, which I might do a separate video on that. But after changing my own eating habits, I was actually a lot curvier, if you will. So after changing my eating habits, I actually dropped 95 pounds within 13 months. And a lot of it had to do with pushing away from fast food and substituting and all. I'll do a separate video on that if you guys are interested in what I did to make it work and how I've been able to sustain. But yeah, I'm still on my own journey. But yeah, I actually did just that. McDonald's is one of the things I had to push away. But to kind of get back to the focal point of all of this, for this type of business, if you will, to be able to pull in that much money and beating out the competition of companies that are fairly credible companies compared to this, that's very telling. It's pretty sickening. Now, also what I've noticed is that in doing research and looking at some of the details, it turns out the primary victims that are being human trafficked to pull in that revenue, which is the 150 billion that I mentioned, the primary victims are, as you guessed it, children. So approximately 130 people are trafficked worldwide every hour. Let that sink in for a minute. 130 people are trafficked every hour. And within that hour, again, the main victim that is being trafficked is children. It's so sad. Actually, one thing I found to be really interesting, I just thought about this. It says 1/3 of the 15 million victims that are forced marriage are under the age of 18, and nearly half of them are younger than 15. And a lot of it not only has to do with sex trafficking, there's also some details tied to just child labor in various locations of the world as well. Now, someone actually did some research, and this is actually on that site. I'm just going based off one site, looking at certain points of detail here. I don't like using the title because it makes me cringe, but it is a reality that we have to face. So someone who is selling a child or an adult, often they're known as a pimp, okay? Now they actually said a pimp can make up to 150,000 to 200,000 per child a year. So imagine where the numbers would go if they had maybe one child, or let's say if they had 10, right? To know that a person can make that much money, excuse me, I'm getting tongue tied here because it's just a thought, it's sickening, off of just a child. And you have to ask yourself, who are these individuals who are willing to pay this much? Or pay enough to allow someone to make that much money off of a child? And what actually drove them to that point? Why did they feel the need to want to hurt such an innocent being? What type of satisfaction does one get from that? It's sickening. It's sickening when you think about it. You know, people like to push the envelope and say, you want to try to be understanding of those individuals. No. I mean, you want to understand what their thought process is in terms of why they feel so compelled to only deal with minors. What is it about them dealing with another adult versus a minor that they find to not be satisfying? Is it like a sense of control, knowing that they are much bigger than the individual? Is it a sense of knowing that they have more knowledge about this thing called life compared to that minor individual? Does it like make up for their own childhood experiences? Was it something that they may have encountered in their own childhood that in some way, by them connecting with the minor, helps them to kind of try to relive that part that they felt was ripped away from them? Just really things that make you say, to be quite honest. It's funny. The scenario is not funny, but I do recall a time when I was younger. I'm an 80s baby, if you will. It's the title, 80s baby. But I'm a 90s kid, okay? I remember, I was my mom's, her oldest and her only girl. I remember playing in the neighborhood. I think that was all maybe 6 or 7. And mind you, in the 80s and 90s, the whole thing with kidnapping was on a rise. It was on a huge scale. I remember America's Most Wanted. That was something they often talked about. You see it on television, like someone being kidnapped. Now, mind you, as a kid, you don't know too much about how serious this thing could be. I remember in the neighborhood I'm playing in, our neighborhood was very well put together, it was much of a blended group. Blended to the point where everyone got along. There was like black and white families living together with no problems, like on the same street and across the street. It was so crazy. Thinking back to it, like this was actually, I used the analogy, it was like a Leave It to Beaver experience in a good way. Everyone got along. And the black kids and the white kids were able to play together. I remember I had quite a few white friends I was playing with. We were out there playing baseball and it was just fun. And we didn't see color. We really didn't. And the families were waving at each other. It was a beautiful experience that I would never forget from my childhood, that part of my childhood. But I go on to say that there was a particular street, like behind the main street we were on, that was a slight bit of a scary one. What was interesting, I could think back to a time where I remember I was playing, and I remember these two individuals. Race doesn't really matter, but I do recall them being African American. It was an African American guy and girl. The guy was driving and the girl was in the passenger seat, but she got out the car. And I remember I think I was playing ball, either that or jump rope. I'm pretty sure I had one of those plastic balls that was bouncing. It was like, some of the balls, if you guys remember the balls we used to have where it had like the little glitter and it was like very, the bright colors, you could just bounce it. It's not like an actual basketball, but it's just like a plastic ball. So it was one of those things. I remember I was outside playing with it. And I remember this lady, I'll never forget her facial expression. And it didn't dawn on me until I got older, like, oh my gosh, they were getting ready to attempt something. She had some paper and she came up to me, she was like, have you seen this girl? She showed me a picture of a girl on a piece of paper. I could tell it was printed out. And I looked, because I didn't recognize the girl. I'm like, no. She's like, are you sure? And I'm like, no. But all the while, I didn't realize she did look kind of sketchy because she was kind of looking around and she was showing me this paper. And she was kind of like looking around. It looks like she was watching her surroundings. I'm just trying to find words to say there. I know being a child, you don't think anything of it. Like, why is this lady constantly asking me this? And I'm telling her, no, I don't recognize her, you know. But I do recall my mom, she yelled for me. She was like, Jessica, she was loud. And see, that was so funny because in the in the neighborhood, that was like an okay thing. Like, you know how we used to have this thing, the saying that when the street lights came on, you knew to go home, right? Or, you know, if you hear a parent yelling for a child to get into the house or to come home, that was actually considered the norm. So me, being outside playing at the time, you know, my mom had called. She was like, Jessica, it's time to come in. She was loud. And I'm just like, okay. And at that point, I think that might have startled them. And I ran right off. I didn't even continue the conversation with that lady or the guy that was driving. I couldn't really tell if there was anyone else in the back because the windows were dark. I do remember that too. But I could tell they kind of like, she kind of scattered off and got back into the car. But by that point, I already had ran off too. But when I looked back, that's when I noticed they were gone. I say all this to say that the business itself, in terms of human trafficking, child trafficking, you never know where one can become a victim of it, what type of neighborhood they could be coming from, what type of region of the world that they could be coming from, because it's everywhere. They actually did a study in terms of numbers, and I'll go into more details about that in reference to the US because, yeah, let's talk about it. Let me just actually take a look at that. It turns out, where is that? I believe it was in reference to the US, we took up about 52%. Where is that? I was really blown away by that number. I cannot find it. But it said that yes, the US accounts for almost 52% of global human trafficking, with the sex trafficking of minors accounting for the largest percentage. 52% is a pretty significant number, and to know that a majority of it comes from our country, that is something that is pretty concerning. Now, as for the US, they've done quite a bit in reference to stepping it up when it comes to how they prioritize their approach in child trafficking. There's some details on the state.gov website that one can take a look at. I'll make sure to include that link in the comments, in the description box below, not the comment section, but I will include that link there for anyone who's interested in taking a look at the details. But based on the information I came across, they really stepped it up in terms of how they can kind of filter out those who may be human trafficked or child trafficking, to be more particular in this case. So I would say, we can't really browbeat our country, those of us who are Americans, we really can't browbeat the US for not having a tighter grip on this. They're, in my opinion, they're truly doing all that they can to stump out this issue. That's what it looks like in my opinion, okay? Now, one thing I do want to point out is that even when it comes down to childhood labor, that too is an equally scary scenario to look at, to put it plainly, because again, these individuals are being forced to have to take on these roles, and without just simply just giving them the opportunity to live life, the way they should as a child. It's something that's not often discussed, but again, kind of going back to the statement I made earlier, it's something that definitely needs to be brought to the forefront. So I say all this to say, I feel like we are definitely at a stage in time that we are really starting to zero in on this issue, to finally go ahead and obliterate it, to finally go ahead and get rid of it altogether. Whether it can be done overnight would be nice if we could on a global scale, but the reality of it all, could that actually be done? No, not at all. It's gonna definitely take some time for it to be done. But I feel like we are truly getting there. And my hopes is that even for those that were kidnapped, whether it was just because, if you're kidnapped just because an individual may have lost their own child and felt they needed to find another child to fill that void. Or maybe someone just simply had decided to kidnap a child because, you know, they felt alone and they just needed someone to look after. Again, all about fulfilling that void. To fulfill that void in various ways. It's different for each individual, I would assume. I would just pray that those children are able to make it home. Make it home to their rightful family. The worst part is to have been taken away from your true family and to be forced in a position where you're dealing with a family that is not even your own for decades, only to later realize that that family was really not your real family. That is, I think, by far the toughest pill to swallow. Now, whether someone can get over it and rebuild with their real family, if they ever cross paths with them, that's one thing. Because again, kind of go back to the example that I made earlier. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, that was a huge issue with children being kidnapped. Whether they were put into child labor, if they were put into sex trafficking, or if they were just simply kidnapped because someone saw them and thought that they were oh so adorable and just wanted to take them and keep them as their own. That too, you know, was a pretty common thing. And some individuals will go on to live to not really know if the family that they grew up knowing is truly their own or not. So to kind of go back to what I was saying in terms of these kids, in terms of today's time, forgetting about the 80s and 90s at this point, I would just hope that those kids are in some way able to truly find their way home to the rightful family, and that they don't have to live a life of always trying to piece it together in reference to the family that they are dealing with. And they don't have to piece it together and try to figure out, is this truly my family or not? You know, it's very sad when things like that happen, but it's something that truly does happen. But I would just hope for these children of today's time that they don't have to encounter that. Now, in reference to buying a ticket, you know, you can buy a ticket for yourself to contribute to the cause, or you can simply just buy a ticket for someone else. As I mentioned to you earlier, it's the notion of like paying it forward. Okay. So the website, I'm going to make sure to include the link in the description box below as well. It's angel.com. So it's angel.com/freedom. Okay. So I will include that link in there for you as well. I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts when it comes to the idea, the issue of human trafficking, in this case, to be more specific, child trafficking, whether it is into child labor or sex trafficking, when it comes to children, the exploitation of children. Do you feel that this is an issue that has long been suppressed and that truly needs to be addressed in this day and age? Do you feel that we are actually on the brink of finally stifling this issue out altogether? Or do you think we're going to need more time in doing so? What are your thoughts in reference to how your location is handling this issue at hand? Do you feel that they are actually doing a fairly good job? Or do you feel that there's more that they can do to really get this boat up and going? Don't hesitate to leave your comments in the comment section below if you haven't done so already. You can also continue to message me on my other platforms as well as email. We're in a new week, you guys. Consultations are open. Yesterday, as you can imagine, I completely blocked that day out because I was determined to go see this film. And I'm so glad I did. It was a good one. It definitely will have you holding on to the edge of your seat. There's several action scenes that really had me like gripping my seat, like, oh my gosh, this is really intense. Heart was racing, but it was good stuff, good stuff. They really did a phenomenal job. The entire cast was phenomenal. As far as the plot, or you could say the synopsis of the film, was very well thought out. I would say this film is definitely one that I would highly recommend, for sure. And yeah, in this case, as always, you guys, I'm definitely sending you with love and light, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.